Welcome to the 101 Ways podcast. This is us giving back to the tech community and sharing advice on topics that matter. Don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen so that you can stay up to date on the next episode. I'm Ollie Happy, your host today, and I'm Product Principal at 101 Ways. This week, I'm joined by Beks Yelland, who is a product leader and founder of the Female Product Lead community. Try saying that 3 times fast. Welcome to the show, Beks. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ollie. Super happy to be here.
Yeah, and we've got lots to talk about today, so we'll kick into it. And let's start with telling folks back home a little bit about you and your journey to date.
Yeah, so 20 years in 20 seconds. Let's go. So I have been a product, let's say since probably around the year 2000. I went back and did a master's degree in interactive media design for interactive media, and ended up being a producer for an interactive TV games channel, which ultimately was the role of product manager. So I started off there, early beginnings, found my way, ending up at Sky in Sky Bet with, doing a similar sort of role, but still not called product manager, but doing that role. So sort of producing games, coming up with the ideas, working with designers, working with the technical teams to deliver an outcome that made sense for the business. I then meandered my way across campus at Sky and ended up in the core box team. And this is in the early noughties. So back then we were still writing very long documents, very long functional requirement documents, breaking those down into technical requirement documents, atomic requirement documents, and handing those over to the technical teams, and then 6 months later crossing our fingers and hoping that they built something that was vaguely resembling what we'd imagined. And then Agile.
Throwing it over the fence, as it were.
Exactly. And then Agile happened and it changed everything almost overnight. And I used to go across campus and talk to the technical teams over there who were building our electronic programming guide at the time. Every day, and some of them liked that, some of them didn't. We were putting post-its on the wall and we were having conversations, and it all became very much more of a conversation, and it literally changed the job of product management, but for me and probably for many other people around that time. Yeah. And I've been doing it ever since. That was the first job where I actually had the title, but certainly I've been doing it for several years prior to that as well. And I've done it ever since. I've done working in broadcast, working in for agencies that do iPad apps, for broadsheets, working for agencies that did digital marketing for professional services like Trans, KPMG, those types of people. Found my way into finance, ended up doing a few years for Reuters on their trading apps, news and trading apps, and ran the mobile team there. Did a bit of credit reference agency, sort of credit and risk, which was interesting. Ended up in banking, HSBC for a couple of years. Did a bit of fintech, blockchain, just as you do. Ended up.
We've all been there.
Did a bit of payments. And then after about 10 years of doing payments, or sort of 10 years in broadcast, 10 years in payments and banking and fintech, I started looking for a mission. I wanted a mission in my career. I wanted my job to mean something. I wanted the legacy that I was creating in the job I did day to day to have something that was meaningful. And up until then, the outputs that I was proud of were the impact I'd had on the people that I work with. And still to this day, I'll look at my LinkedIn recommendations and remember the things that I've done and the positive impacts I've had on the people that I've worked with. But I wanted something more. I wanted something tangible. So I ended up in climate tech. So the last couple of roles I've been to climate tech startups. So
super interesting.
Reducing the tonnage carbon emissions from, retail, sort of commercial real estate. And then in my most recent role, grid level, increasing the use of renewable energy on the grid. So that's all around software that enabled the monetization and operationalization of renewable energy generated and then stored and then sold back into.
It's really good to see that industry of finally getting to the stage where it's getting some critical mass behind it, right? Getting some decent funding behind it and some scale.
Yeah, and we won't get political, but yes, even more so with the recent change in the UK government, there's some really good things happening. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. But always been products. Love solving big product problems, love creating a 0 to 1 product, love building product teams, love making sure that product teams work and have a good level of interoperability. I can't even say that today. Put my teeth back in and have a bit of coffee.
Yeah, fair enough. Interoperability, even.
That's the one. Thank you, Ollie.
It's easier when you listen. Yeah.
Basically, the partnership
Right.
with all the other aspects of the organisation. And that's something that time and time again has been a really interesting challenge, especially in a startup that has been heavily sales-led, let's call it, in how the conversations that the sales organisation have with the customers has started to define direction and commitments to customers, because obviously at the early days of a company, you just need to keep your customers happy. But I would argue even then, it's worth putting a level of product thinking into what you decide to build. Otherwise, time and time again, you see companies who've ended up building 3 or 4 or more versions of their product for the use of their customers, and that just becomes unmanageable quickly.
Seeking fit, and that product market fit taking longer than it needed to. Yes.
Yeah. So changing that conversation has always been an interesting one, and figuring out how to do that without pissing everyone off, I think is a really interesting challenge and transformational challenge that I really relish. I quite like that. How do we get the product team working with the rest of the company? And if you use the word product-led, how do you say that product-led without people getting really annoyed, thinking that it's about the product team being in charge as opposed to the product defining where you're going, not the people in the product team defining where you're going. Very different.
Yes. I sometimes think that if the discipline of product had a slightly different name, it might actually be a little bit easier to differentiate ourselves from the product itself.
Yes, that's I've never thought of that. That's a good point.
English, we simplify. Great, thank you. There's one more thing I'd like to dig into, if we may. You then went on and sought to create a bit of community. So tell us a bit about that.
So at the same time as I was looking for a mission in my career and wanted to work for a company that was doing something that had a legacy that I could be proud of, I also wanted to really give back to the community. I've been doing product for 20 odd years. I'd done mentoring, single mentoring relationships over the years. And the more and more I thought about what the impacts were and the consistent challenges that a lot of my mentees had, it just really resonated with me that there was a lot of people out there who had significant amounts of experience, who just were dealing with huge levels of imposter syndrome and lack of confidence. Right. And I was seeing this time and time again. I was seeing the rise of the product guru, let's call it, and the thought leaders in the product community who have very strong voices, and how much that shakes people to their core. Even people who've been serving in product for a long, long time, not just new to role or aspirational product people, looking at these big statements that are being made by people who, let's face it, probably have an agenda, a book to sell or a blog to push. And more often than not, those agendas don't necessarily consider the impact of their words on a lot of people who are sitting there just going, well, maybe I'm not a product person at all, or maybe I'm not doing it right, so maybe I should do something else. Or
I've observed that in my teams.
Doing it in the way that so-and-so has said I should do it.
Yes.
Sorry, just a pause, quick pause.
That's all right.
So yeah, I think I was seeing a need. I was seeing a lot of people who were struggling, and also just as a single serving product leader myself, it can be quite lonely. And so there was a level of self-servingness in that to me. I wanted to find other people who were doing what I was doing, feeling what I was feeling, thinking what I was thinking. And I felt the best way to do that was to create a community and see what's out there. And I'd always wanted to lean into what it's like for female leaders in tech, female product leaders in tech, and how hard that can be just in general. I often as a pregnant woman or as a young mum, would find myself massively sleep deprived in a room, having to, run a meeting, run a workshop, drive things forward and keep people going on very, very little sleep with, baby brain is the real thing. You sort of go through life thinking that you're at a certain level, and then you go through the whole, like, having a baby, being pregnant, having a young baby, being sleep deprived from having a young baby. You have a couple of years off after all of that. For me, I had 3 kids, and then felt very, very soon after that I then went into the perimenopause stage of life. So there's always something, it feels like, as a female, there's always something. Like, we have this wonderful thing where we can create life, but we have that extra time.
And there just aren't
really come to.
Yes, exactly. And sorry, there was a little delay. And there just aren't enough women in leadership positions either. And therefore the culture is not set up to support that, is it? Or to take that into consideration, I guess.
Yeah. And so if you find yourself in an organisation where you haven't got enough female product leaders and you can't look to them for inspiration and advice and guidance, it felt right to me to try and pull all of those people who are there that could be providing that guidance and inspiration to a whole, new generation of women, and making it accessible. And that was the main thing, was for the female product leaders there as a community, aspiring product leaders and aspiring product managers can come into that community, and it's a safe space, no judgment. They can fall on the expertise of tens of, it's growing sort of slowly. There's a couple of hundred maybe people in the community workspace at the moment, but then we do events as well, which not everybody who comes to the events is in the community, but pulling everyone together and saying, like, here's a bunch of amazing people and they're making themselves available to you. And the other aspect of it, of course, is giving product leaders a platform and allowing them to easily give back. Because what happens often is you want to give back, you have the time and the energy to give back, and by the time you've found how you can give back, you've run out of time and energy. So making it really easy for people to go, I want to give back. Oh, I can just dive into that, that Slack workspace, that community, or I can go to that event. I can make myself available in the time that I've got, and then, I can get back to my day job or back to being, a full-time, whatever it might be. And I think for me, yes, people might say that it's quite exclusive, saying that you're creating a community that's just for women, but we do invite men to be a part of the thought leadership team. So we've run quite a few what we call speed mentoring events, which have been great. We've done virtual and done face-to-face. And quite a lot of male product leaders will come along to that and be there because they want to support female product leaders of tomorrow. So that's worked quite well. People have asked me if I would open it up to men from a the non-leader side, the mentee side rather than the mentor side, let's say. And I think I pretty much made a decision that isn't where I want to go. I think there's enough other things out there for people who are looking for help and advice and support. And for me, the one thing that I wanted to keep for the female product lead was this is about creating a safe space. It's about supporting product leaders of today and tomorrow. That's what it's about.
I bet and I think that's very reasonable. When there's an underrepresented group, then the culture that group operates in terms of business culture is not necessarily sensitive to their particular situation and needs and challenges, and therefore they need more support, which this community provides. So I think that is really valuable.
Exactly. Do you find, isn't it, Ollie? Maybe it would be, to any underrepresented group as opposed to everybody.
Right.
But then the word female is a bit confusing. So anyway.
Fair enough. In this day and age. So just before we move off that point and onto the topic of the day. So do you find that the dialogue is different? If you were to compare, say, some of the conversations that happen, let's say at an in-person event or a face-to-face event at the female product lead versus, say, Mind the Product, where it's much bigger and more mainstream and quite male dominated. Do you find that the dialogue is different, that the tone is different?
The speed mentoring events are very specifically about the needs of the mentee. And so the structure of it means that the only tone that I can represent to you is the tone from the one-on-one conversations that I'm having, because it's not really about I'm a leader and I'm going to speak for like 10 minutes and talk to you about the things that I know. We have had that. We've had visiting speakers come in and sort of set us up and give us some inspiration, like the amazing Jane Austen's come in. And, it's just a great way to start because everyone's like feeling incentivized because she's just incredible and had the most, amazing career. But mostly it's around really leaning into what the needs are of the mentee. So there's a lot of pre-feeding to them to make sure they're coming prepared and they've got some key challenges and questions they want answered. And I would say the tone in those engagements is very much focused on them, making sure they know that no question is a silly question, that they can ask anything. And it's a safe space for them to be able to investigate and dive into things that maybe they don't feel able to bring to the product leaders or the other leaders within their actual, their day job. So
I see.
Level of opening that conversation up, things that people find really tricky. And so I wouldn't be able to tell you all the conversations that happen because obviously they're between the mentor and the mentee, but iPad have certainly would represent what we're trying to achieve is that it's about that focus. It's about the mentee. It's not about
much more support than broadcast.
Yeah. However, I would say that there is a byproduct benefit for the mentors as well, especially mentors who come in. Am I okay to come in as a mentor? Am I qualified? Am I experienced enough? People who are like heads of or directors of that have been in product for 10, 15 years are genuinely asking me that. And they're always women, aren't they, as well, I would say. Like, it's always a woman who's like, that imposter syndrome, am I senior enough to come in and be a mentor for you or be a thought leader? So the byproduct benefit for them is giving that confidence. So as you go in as a mentor and you're there being asked all manner of questions and then you find that you can answer or advise on most of them, it's a great way to just give you that little boost going, oh my gosh, I know so much. I've learned so much. I can impart so much knowledge and advice. And it's a great reminder for people. It gives them a little boost as well, makes them feel a little bit good about themselves, which is a great byproduct for them. So there's normally a really good buzz in those events. Like even the virtual ones, there's quite a good buzz because people are feeling good. They're feeling good about the fact that they're having those conversations and they're helping people. And it's crazy how much stuff you can cover in 10 minutes. It's absolutely mental.
Yeah, that's really cool. So it's much more of a let's support you with where you are today.
Yeah. And there's another community that I'm also a leader of, which is called the Product Mind. I don't know if you've heard of that one, which is very much around the mental health and well-being of product professionals globally. So that was founded by Graham Reed and Jack. And so I joined a couple of years ago, I think time was elastic, as a sort of community leader. And it's another great environment that, again, is very mixed. It isn't specifically for any demographic. It's for any product person who either suffers themselves with mental health and well-being or has a passion for being part of the solution for people who do struggle with those things. So Graham's quite open that he's had his own mental health journey and he very openly speaks about that. So that was why he started the community. For me, less so from that side of things, more that I just want to be a part of the solution. So I talk quite a lot around psychological safety for product teams. And we might get into that when we get into the subject of the day. But for me, that's what the main reason why I joined that community was to be a part of the solution and to help people, point people in the right direction, bring thought leaders in specifically that have that expertise around, how can you increase your mental health? How can you protect your mental health in a very high pressured, role?
Yeah. And let's face it.
Suffer with mental health and well-being, but it's just leaning in and just saying, product role, like you're right in the middle of it. You've got to people, and it can often be a lot. It can often be quite a lonely role, even as a ICPM. You're there in the team, and you're the only product person in the team. And as a product leader, you're the only product leader sometimes.
Yeah, and there are times in a startup when you're the only product person in the business, right? So
you're the only product person at all. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, great. The product mind. All right. So we'll include links to both the female product lead community and the product mind in the show notes. Thank you. That's a really big one for me, and anybody who's listening who line managers in general, but particularly line managers in product, will know that wellness and psychological safety is a huge theme, and it's really difficult and really challenging as a line manager to see people in the team struggle and want to support them. So I think these sorts of communities are just a really good thing. Great. Okay, so let's now move on to the topic of the day. So, is product in crisis? When we first started talking about what our first topic might be, because I think, folks, you may see Beks again in the near future on a different episode. But when we talked about the topic for today, and you wanted to talk about product being in crisis, before we jump into your great infographic and a bit of a potted history to set the scene, what do you mean when you say, is it in crisis?
I think I'm referring to LinkedIn when I talk about that, and the noise that's on LinkedIn. And we talked about it earlier around, like, why did I start the female product lead community, and what need I saw in terms of people feeling very much the imposter syndrome, like I'm not a proper product person or I'm not doing it right. And quite a lot of that fear that I witnessed in sort of mentor-mentee relationships or in group sessions or in events, and also just seeing how people are talking in general on LinkedIn, it comes from the sort of the puristic views of a few people who have very much an agenda. And I don't have an issue with people who are there serving the needs of the product community by having very strong views on what the product role should be. I think that's great, like that everyone's doing something that's useful. But what I see is that a lot of people take those puristic views and, like square peg round hole, going, well, that's not what I'm doing. Oh shit, I'm doing it wrong. And I think a lot of people see that the conversations that are happening, apply that idealistic view to their day-to-day and don't see a match. And for me, there's this question, this big question at the moment around, well, what is product, or is product in crisis? Or, with this whole Brian Chesky gate, as we now refer to it, with the noise that emanated from I think it was like a Figma event where he was speaking at, and talked about how he got rid of product managers and, made them into product marketeers, because he's a designer and he very much is design led. Now, I have very strong views about what he's done with that company, and I would look at Trustpilot and look at the Trustpilot scores, and I would question the effectiveness of some of his decisions in terms of the customer success and how the actual journey end to end of a customer for Airbnb, is actually working. Like, the site might well be beautiful, but is the customer actually happy? And I would say the Trustpilot scores are to believe, possibly not. Yeah. And this is, for me, people are looking at that because he's Brian Chesky and because he's the CEO and founder of a massive brand. They get scared when he says this is what he's going to do, and they think that that's what everyone's going to do. So all product people become product marketeers. All product people are going to be, replaced by product designers. You don't need both, for example.
And as someone who started in marketing, I have extremely strong views on that. And while there are definitely seductive similarities in terms of the 4 Ps or the 5 Ps, the product, place, promotion, and price, yes, a lot of those things have become the domain of the product manager, but there is a vast difference between a product marketeer and a product manager for a reason, I would suggest.
And I think what to answer your original question, like why am I asking this sort of fairly fundamental existential question, is product in crisis? It's because what I've seen over the years, and that is quite a few years now.
You and me both, yes.
That we've always had these big chunky questions. And so the reason that I started to map those out visually and wanted to start the conversation about this a bit more was to really remind people that we might be having these big conversations now, like big chunky questions around what is product versus, project manager, for example, like has come up again recently with the whole feature factory debate. Am I really just a project manager or a delivery manager? Am I doing the role of product or not? And this is a perennial question. We had that right back in the day in terms of defining what product is in software. And so what I wanted to do was for people who maybe weren't aware of some of those big existential challenges and questions that we've been asking over the couple of decades that product management in software has been really insane. Obviously, product managers have existed before, but I'm talking about product management in software since the early noughties. We've had these conversations and they've always been different, and some of them are cyclical, like the project management one. But I wanted to make sure people knew that it's okay that we're having some of these challenges and we'll figure it out, and that product's here to stay. We're not going to get replaced by AI. We're not going to get replaced by designers. We're not going to get replaced by marketeers. There's always going to be a role for product. And in fact, in terms of products as a discipline and the community, there's over 1 million product people in the world today. That is very, very different to what it was like a decade ago even. Like it literally exploded in the last 10 years.
Yes, I understand from one of the speakers at Mind the Product this year that in London that there are 10x times the number of CPOs in Fortune 100 businesses in the US alone in the last couple of years as opposed to before.
And that's a really good point, Ollie, because it's not just the number of product people, it's product leadership as well as a growing discipline. Because obviously product management, I see product management being involved with the teams is one thing, product leadership is an entirely different thing. And this is another point we could probably get onto if we had all the time in the world, that they're very different jobs.
I think we might save that for next episode because it deserves its time. And you're right. It's something that if product is at times not understood, then certainly the difference between doing it and leading it is worth discussing.
As well, because you have to be contextually applicable in the product leadership role to the rest of the leadership. You have to be mindful of that. Whereas I think product management in IC level is probably a bit more consistent from org to org because the process is generally the same. Like, what's the problem? Fix the problem. Build a solution to the problem. Yeah. Whereas in product leadership, it's very different because you could be going in to try and convince everybody the product's necessary, or you could be going in to prove why it's going to help you or prove that it can help the strategy.
Yeah.
Like it's just a point.
Or you could be going in to roll out something that the business has already bought into, right? You scale the operation.
My assumptions, exactly. So yeah, it could be a very different role depending on where the leadership are in their beliefs of product and value of product and how they want product to work in their organisation. So that's what I mean by it being very different, very contextually, different.
Yeah. Let's show them the beautiful infographic, shall we? So for the folks back home, we will include this in the show notes, and you'll be able to go and have a look at it from Beks' LinkedIn post, and we'll talk it through as we go through these few stages.
Yeah, so for people who aren't seeing this as I'm talking, I'm going to try and make it clear what I'm talking about. But like you say, Ollie, I think it's probably best if people refer to the image which is on the post. So what I've done here is the time series from the early noughties all the way through to today. And what I'm trying to illustrate here was there are some big chunky questions, as we've already talked about, right from the beginning. And so one of those first questions was, what is product management in a software team? Where the Agile Manifesto was created in 2002. Oh gosh, I didn't put the date on that one. I can't remember. It was 2001. I can't remember now.
I think it was 2001. And what's important is that it was the early noughties.
It really was very much so. I remember it was in October and it was in the ski resort, but the date had gone out of my mind. But the point being is that changed things overnight. It really did, because how a product person interoperated with the rest of a team, we went from having these really big chunky documents to having conversations, to having relationships, and to talking to people and figuring things out in partnership together. That was the big change. And
I've heard people describe it as the moment that product stepped down out of its ivory tower and started working with the team.
Yes. And it was one of the reasons why I stayed in product management, because I genuinely don't think I would have done if it had continued to be this sort of very much dictatorship, I think, is the best way to refer to it. Like, here's my document, here's my, like, here's the Bible, the product Bible, go and build it, go off and build it type of thing. And it didn't sit well with me. I didn't want to spend my career writing Word documents. Little did I know that I'd spend the bulk of my career then in PowerPoint instead, but thank God for Canva. And so, yeah, that was one of the big existential questions of the day. How do I figure out what product management means in this new world that we find ourselves in? And then the next one was, how do I then explain to people what we do who don't understand? How do I illustrate or explain that I'm not a project manager, I'm a product manager? And so around that time, we had some thought leaders in Mind the Product with Martin Ericsson's sort of famous Venn diagram. Where am I? You are here, pointing, to the middle of the Venn diagram, UX, tech and business. Right. Well, that's great. People now know what I do. I'm this cog in the wheel. I'm not UX, tech or the business, but I understand all of them and I can represent all of them and I can make sure that we're delivering something that makes sense for those three entities.
Yes.
At the same time, we had the SVPG bubbled up. The blog started being written by Marty Kagan off the back of the success of his first book. And he was helping us to define the narrative and to understand how to explain what the product was. But we collectively, even without those thought leaders, I think, began to know how to explain what we did. So that was the big sort of chunky problem and evolution of the early noughties. And then cloud computing happened, around 2006, AWS and big data became a thing. And that changed, again, how product worked. Because before then, you would do maybe a bit of qual research. You'd do some qualitative research, maybe some focus groups, for example. But you would then try to get some statistically valid data from doing some quant. But that was pretty much it. Most of the time, you're either using that or you're just using your gut as a product person. And then data came along. And I remember running around Bluefin building at HSBC, trying to find data people, like in a few years later. Where are the data people? How
are these data people?
Yeah, exactly. And so because around, the early teams, that was how do I use that data? How do I take that data, use that data and allow data to drive decisions? That was a big challenge.
And a big change that happened here is that in the background, PMs were going from being physical products to being installed or shipped and installed software products to then SaaS products, right? And that was a big shift along with AWS, wasn't it? Because that allowed, like, I can remember my first product role was actually release manager. And when I say release, I mean make the software box look nice and make sure we print enough CDs.
Yeah.
and how different that is to the CI/CD, how many times we deploy today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, that's a great example. I think one of the other challenges around that time, because data started to become a thing and other departments were being measured in terms of their value through data, then we started asking ourselves, how do we show the business that we add value as product managers? So how could we use that data to show that we're turning the dial on the metrics in the right way? We're reducing friction or we're increasing acquisition, et cetera, et cetera. That was a big, big challenge.
And a lot of businesses are still stuck there, right?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's really tricky in an early stage organization as well. Like you want, and we're not going to get into OKRs because that is another topic. But if you're trying to measure yourself in that way, tangible value that you're creating through the work that you're doing with the product and evolving the product, it's very tricky to measure that success if you don't have enough users. You're going, well, we've created product market fit and we've sold it to 3 people. And actually that takes me back to the whole B2B versus B2C as well. How different is the role of product and product strategy and product delivery? And customer research in a B2B versus B2C environment is very, very different. Sort of getting statistically valid data out of your customer base in the B2B when you've only got a handful of customers in terms of entity. How do you do that? How do you know that you've done something successfully, or do you know that you're delivering to a customer need that needs to be solved? How do you find that commonality, for example?
And if you say we're in a supply chain software business and had 5 customers, 25% churn is a big deal, right? Yeah. Or even 2% churn is a big deal. Whereas for B2C, it's, you're right, it's quite different.
These are not different. The point I'm trying to make is that throughout the last couple of decades, there's been big questions. And then people started having communities talking more, sharing information, or more, moving around more. So by this point, around the sort of the mid-teens, people started talking around like the role of product being industry agnostic, or moving from industry to industry, or being able to apply your skills in lots of different industries. But then what they notice is that then sometimes, even though there's core aspects of the job and the things that you're responsible for that don't change, there's also things that do change. And so why is product different from company to company, from industry to industry, from tech stack to tech stack, from B2B to B2C? And yes, there are always going to be differences, but there's also very much core principles that remain the same. You're looking at what the problem is or what the opportunity is. You're figuring out how to create a solution that solves that problem, or creates something that is going to leverage that opportunity. That's the core piece that's always consistent.
Agree.
I think we've got multiple toolkits, multiple routes to create a roadmap. We had the ice, water, steam back in the day, and then we sort of overlaid that with now, next, and later, but very much the same principles that always existed. And lots of thought leaders and product tech in the product tech industry, let's call it, the people who are serving the product community with solutions, software solutions. That exploded. Jira's always been there, but now you've got Jira plus Asana plus whatever it might be, multiple routes to do the same thing.
And I remember around that time feeling like my industry of product now feels like an industry. We've now got product platforms, mm-hmm. and people like Product Board and Jira and Aha and folks like Amplitude and Optimizely started talking to me and my teams, whereas previously I felt like we were borrowing the tech team's tools.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah, absolutely. So which tool is the right tool for me, and how do I fit that to my org? And then we've got this sort of the narrative that's pervaded, from at least a decade. What's the difference between product management and product marketing? Where do you draw the line between a product owner and a business analyst, or
the big one?
What's the difference, or what's the ownership difference between product design, research, and product managers? And sometimes product designers have to do more than just design because the product managers are too busy doing other things, or they don't exist. And so obviously, that's pervaded. And then obviously more recently, we've got the product ops role that's bubbled up as well. And I think
let's talk about that for a moment, because I know you've got thoughts about product ops and in the context of scaling and bedding down a product organization, particularly in a business that's not typically had a product function before. Yeah. How do you see product ops sitting into that?
I think if you've got the budget and the size team where it makes sense, bringing product ops in to facilitate transformation is a no-brainer. But often companies don't have the budget and the size of the team that would enable product ops to have a place. And so product has to do it itself. And you have to find the time and the wherewithal to be able to facilitate those transformational changes yourself. I think I can see a day where people can come in as an advisor or as a consultant, or the art of product ops and transformation is more understood, and that might make things easier because more often than not you have to make it up in each organization. But we're already seeing that today. There's thought leaders really starting to build up their views on what product ops as a discipline is and how it can really facilitate change, substantial change and transformation, and facilitate the product team being able to deliver what they need to deliver, facilitating product strategy, facilitating product growth. I think there's a time and a place for it, but not every company gets the benefit of being able to have it. It's the same as DevOps and design ops and,
and any good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well said.
So this is going to be really tricky for people who don't have the visual, but I would say it's worth going and having a look. So one of the things that has driven this whole narrative of how the role has evolved and changed is thinking right back to 2010 with Martin Erickson's Venn diagram. You are here, UX tech business. And it was quite simple, easy to illustrate the role that we had as product in that fairly simple view. And what I would say now is that now we are here. And it's the daisy sort of diagram instead of a Venn diagram, as in multiple immeasurable number of petals instead of a Venn, with all of the different aspects of the org. You've got user research, you've got product marketing, you have customer service, you've got the board and investors, you've got data science, product analytics, finance, and product has a role with all of those aspects of the org and should be finding ways to partner and facilitate the needs of each of those aspects of the org, because more often than not, the success of the product is the success of the business. And that makes things tricky because you need to understand and be able to walk a mile in the shoes of all your partners within the org. And as those partners become more prolific and more complex and more varied, and their agenda and their needs are different from one to the other, the role of the product manager needs to understand all of that aspects of those organizational areas. And I think it's great because what we're saying here is that product has evolved to the point where it is intrinsically part of the organization, and that all aspects of the organization now are interested in what product do, what the product is, so the people and the product itself. And for me, I think it just illustrates how the role has become more complex and how and why it is different from org to org, because not every org will have all of those, and the way that each of those departments runs will be slightly different. And if you haven't got research, then designers are doing it. If you haven't got designers doing research, then product do it. If you haven't got a product marketing team, then product do product marketing as well as doing product, and so on and so on.
And it's different for a product business or a service business, and it's different at different stages of the business life, and it's different in different products within the portfolio and the lifestyle, this stage of their life. And this is a really good example of how one model can be helpful, but also can be harmful if it's blanket applied. So if we think about this product in the center of the daisy, business success equaling product success, literally being in the middle of things that we've arrived at now, and then we compare that back to the Erickson model of the three circles. The three circles it's so delightfully simple. It's seductively simple, right? But I find whenever drawing it with teams, they'll say, that's good. We've got the designers, we've got the technology people, and we've got the business feature. What about customers? Or what about sales? Or what about operations? And it becomes clear that there are more circles in this diagram.
And it gets more and more complex. And of course, if you take that and you apply it in from B2B to B2C, then the conversations again are very, very different. The sales or the commercial org in a B2B environment is entirely different to a commercial org in B2C. And the relationship that product have with that commercial org will inevitably be entirely different. And often you have to dig into pre-sales and be part of those early stage conversations in B2B, because you're the product expert / domain expert, and you can't expect your entire commercial org to have that knowledge. And so if you don't have specifically trained up pre-sales consultants or engineers, then it will always then inevitably fall to the product team to do that as well.
And there's nothing more gratifying or challenging for a business idea than standing in front of someone and trying to explain why they need it.
Exactly. And yes, so I think, here we go. So then we moved through to like the mid, sort of around 2020. And I think the role of CPO, we talked about the rise of the CPO and the product leader role, and the definition of what product leadership as a discipline is, as opposed to, or as it's different to the discipline of product management itself. And I think a lot of people talk around what is the role of product leadership. And I don't think that we've defined that successfully yet as a community. I think that there's lots of different ways of being a product leader. And I think you also have a lot of people in leadership positions today who haven't necessarily grown up through products themselves. You have CPOs who've never done product at all, and that happens a lot. Now, I would argue that that's okay in some situations. If you've got someone who's a domain expert or a sales expert in that domain and they've become CPO and they've got a good set of people underneath them, then for me, that why is there a problem there? You know, they're leading the team. They don't necessarily need to understand the discipline. As long as
no different to an accountant leading a sales organization, or an operational person leading a technical organization, because not all CTOs are technical.
But they're going to do the job differently. And this is something people need to be aware of. The CPO who's not grown up through product themselves and hasn't walked a mile in the shoes of a product owner or a product manager and understands what it's like to work deeply embedded within the tech team, they're not going to necessarily understand the aspects and the challenges of that. And
that unfortunately leads to quite a few challenges where, in my experience, people will say things like, I mean, the team know the roles and responsibilities. Why is that a problem for them? They know, we've been through a workshop of how to run a customer discovery phase. Why are they not doing it? And why are they struggling to figure out which tool to use? And as you say, it's probably often due to not having walked a mile in the shoes of being in the center of things.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I think for me, the most senior product person in an organization and how they run that team, it's going to be different in every contact. It will be different. The influence that they have on the SLT, on the C-suite, will be different in every instance. And what they're trying to achieve as a CPO / whatever their title might be, is going to be entirely different. Are they singularly responsible for business growth through the growth of the product? Or do they have support in a CSO or a CGO, like a chief strategy officer or a chief growth officer, or are they doing it on their own? Are they a CPO, CTO? Are they looking after both orgs?
And that's a topic for another day, an interesting hybrid take on, could this be one person?
And it's a different job. And why is it the technical person can wear two hats more easily than a product person can wear two hats? And I think, it's a very interesting one. You very often see someone who's grown up through the engineering org who happily, comfortably take on those two hats, but they've never been a product person. And if you've worked as long as we have in a tech environment, even if you're not a technical person, why would you not be able to be a CPO, CTO just as easily?
Yeah.
And I think there's just lots of challenges with the role of product leadership at that level at the moment.
Yes. And to me, that's, again, no different than having a COO who runs product and tech. Can that person do that effectively? Would it make a difference if they'd come from one side or the other? It's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Right. So then where did we get to?
Well, then we're sort of right up to date, and we've answered some of these questions. We answered them, and then we're asking them again, and they come around, and they're perennial, and the challenges pervade. What are the challenges of the future? And so I pose a couple of suggestions at the bottom of this infographic in terms of what the next set of challenges could be for us. The contextually relevant application of product methodologies in an org, is that ever going to get resolved? Are we always going to be trying to do the most complicated prioritization rubric, or are we going to understand that sometimes just a simple trade-off decision is going to be enough? Are we ever going to stop?
Are you suggesting that the Spotify model doesn't apply everywhere all the time?
It beggars belief. Are we ever going to stop talking around the role of feature delivery versus the role of strategy and innovation? Are we ever going to stop asking that question if we're stuck in an environment where there's just a huge backlog of things that we need to do, whether that's driven by the exec or by customers or by your competition, and you don't feel that you've got space to be able to be creative or strategic or to innovate? Does that mean that you're not a product manager? Are we ever going to stop asking that question? Probably not. Are we going to become more and more responsible on the outcomes, the commercial success of our product more than we are today, and held accountable for them in the same way as the commercial team are, where you have a base salary and you will get a bonus or you will get commission based on the success of your product? Is that something that's going to happen? I would imagine at some stage it will do. Prove your value, get the bonus and the benefits of the value that you've delivered.
Yeah, and if we consider, I think you're right, and if we continue to draw that line of product people rising through the organization and the growth of the number of CPOs, naturally CEOs will at times graduate from CPO, won't they? So we'll begin to see product leaders leading businesses, won't we?
Yeah, why not? But also, how does that CPO or the product leader interoperate with the rest of the C-suite? And is there ever going to be some consistency there? Are we ever going to see a time where you would have a CPO in seat at the same time as the CEO and the CTO? Because often we'll see a startup, for example, that will operate for a huge amount of time without any product leadership because the founder's doing it or the CTO's doing it. Well, no one's doing it, but they don't think that they need it to be done at that level, and they're quite happy just to have a team of product ICs.
Yes, because they've got their big idea and they want to crack on. Yes.
Yeah. Or is the fractional role going to become, more useful in as much as if you've got someone who's coming in as a fractional product leader, that the interesting conversations that I've recently been having, for example, are the beauty of that is that's agenda free, that you don't have someone coming in a product leadership position who's got their own agenda, either their agenda in terms of their career or their agenda in terms of the product. They are literally coming in to facilitate transformation or product success, and they're serving the needs of the C-suite and the board.
As a specialist set of skills that could be brought in when needed. Yeah, interesting. And you know what? That's the way businesses think about things like CRM rollout or DevOps setup. So why not look at product and the definition of strategy and how that fits into a business transformation as a set of specialist skills? Well, it makes sense.
And then all the different disciplines within the product family, within a tech environment, are we going to see more definition or more roles bubble out? Or are we going to see, munging of a couple of roles becoming a single role? I would say we're probably going to see more of the same that we've seen in the last 10 years. There may well be more roles yet to come. There may well be examples of how people are covering and double hatting or triple hatting across multiple of different disciplines because they need to. And what we'll see is people navigating the product space in a nice squiggly way. They could start off like yourself as a product marketeer, moving into product. They could be a product ops person from day one now. Then you'll have a time where people will go from product ops into product management or instead of vice versa. And then a lot of people who have moved from design into product management and then back again.
Yes, and we've been talking in the last few days, haven't we, about how, and I imagine designers who are listening will look at this diagram and think, this actually feels kind of familiar, because designers have had a similar development, haven't they? Yes. And rise and
I would love to see a similar infographic detailing that, because I think we had some very interesting roles back in the day for what is now UX. You had information architect was an interesting one back in the day. I don't know if you ever worked with an information architect, Ollie.
I did, and they still come up with some clients and some businesses because they still have some of them.
A long time ago. That's interesting.
Yeah, just like PMO, there are still project or program management offices and some businesses, and that just goes to show, doesn't it, how businesses are different ages and at different stages.
Yes. So I think my point, if we're going to sort of make one point to illustrate all of this, is that we will always be asking these big, chunky questions. We will always have big, chunky challenges. Every discipline does. We guess in our own heads sometimes as product people. We maybe react more than we should to some of these challenges. We maybe feel passionate as we should about our discipline. I think most people who are in product have a level of passion about being a product person. And so if we feel like people are questioning who we are, what we do, and the value we add, then we're going to react to that. But I guess what I want people to remember is that it's never not been there. These challenges have always been there. They've just been different, and they'll probably never go away. And what we need to do is just be okay with that.
Yeah. Well said.
Well said.
Don't worry, this too shall pass, and this may have been seen before. And you know what? If it helps, think about the sales organization, which will certainly not be called that right now wherever you are. It will be called the commercial org, but it used to be called the sales org. And think about the person who runs that team, who's probably now called a chief commercial officer, but used to be a sales director or a head of sales or a business development manager or a growth person. There have been a number of different iterations, and they probably won't be called the chief commercial officer in 10 years' time. So if even something as fundamental as the selling of a product to a customer is going through versions and different ways of organizing it and naming it, it's not surprising that product, something so central to delivering value to customers, is also, right?
And we can always look to the Scrum Masters if you want to feel better about our lot, because they've had a rough ride.
Yeah. Seen as the savior, and then seen as the person that was yesterday's savior, and then
you've got a Scrum Master who must be doing something wrong. So let's quickly not have one.
That's right. And my great deep love is delivery managers, because as soon as things start to scale, and if we think back to the Ericsson diagram, and we've got the three folks working together in design, tech, and business, that's all very well, but nothing gets shipped, does it? Because there are 12 squads and they aren't stitched together, and somebody needs to do that.
Yeah.
And that is going to be the product and tech leads if we don't have someone to help. So yeah, I do feel for Scrum people, and I think that there's absolutely still a role for making sure that we deliver the right thing at the right time.
Well, I guess we spent an awful long time asking lots of questions, sometimes answering them, sometimes not, and then sometimes asking the same questions again, which means that we don't feel like we're getting anywhere, but I think we are. I think product as a community, product as a discipline is massively maturing. I think the product tech industry has obviously exploded. The number of product people that exist is so much more today than it was just 5-10 years ago. We talked about
absolutely.
There's well over 1 million product people in the world today. And like you said, the role of CPO in FTSE, 100s, etc., is much, much bigger than it's ever been. I don't think we're going anywhere. And for me, I love the choice I made. I'm so happy that I've spent the last couple of decades in the product discipline. I feel like pretty much most people I meet that are a long-serving product person are awesome. They're people that want to get shit done. They're people who love talking. They're people who like building relationships. And most often you find very much a like-minded individual. And what's better than that?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. So if we stop the share and think about wrapping up, then and you've already started to pull on some of the key threads, but what is your advice for today's product people, particularly the youngins, but also some of us with a little bit of grey perhaps down the side of our heads?
I think the one thing I would say is that if you're suffering from imposter syndrome, which is the best way to describe it, because it is you do feel like you're suffering from it, because it can, for some people, be debilitating. It can be career limiting. If you find yourself in the unfortunate position of having to look for a new role with the sort of big tech layoffs that we've seen, it can really get in the way of your navigation of applying for roles, putting yourself forward, feeling like you're worth that leadership role, even though you've done leadership roles before, and maybe compromising too much on the roles that you're willing to go for in order to try and avoid imposter syndrome. And what I would say to you is that you've got to know that you're not alone. This is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, so forgive me, but I do have a view that pretty much everybody, unless they're a narcissist, is going to suffer from imposter syndrome at some point in their career. Everybody will have that at some point. So you're not alone. Everyone I talk to has dealt with it or is dealing with it. It's okay. Don't fret. Don't get confused or befuddled by the noise in the product tech industry. Don't let some of those puristic views get you down or challenge you to the point where you don't feel like you're able to go for that role or push yourself for a promotion or argue the toss of where you should be in your career. Just remember that we've been here for a while, we're going to be here for some while to come, and there's always a pragmatic way of applying some of those puristic methodologies. Take them for what they are, use them to drive you, but don't stick to the advice, beyond the realms of sanity, I would say.
Well said. Well said. Thank you for sharing it. And particularly speaks to me is the point around, there's an irony, isn't there? Being in the center of things, perhaps having more perspective than many others might have on what needs to happen and what's standing in the way.
Yeah.
And then to be questioned because being in the center of things is central to the success of the business. And of course, that's concerning to everybody in the business, and everybody is talking about it, therefore talking about you. And then also to feel like I've heard it described as product people in the past had all the responsibility but no seat on the board.
Mm.
I think that's a challenging but also very rewarding and maybe even selfless place to be. And it can feel quite lonely, can't it, while being in the middle of the maelstrom.
And actually, on that point of loneliness, I probably want to remind people around the rise of the communities and make use of those. Like we've mentioned the two that I'm involved with, but there are so many communities today. And I think that's the best way to survive and thrive in the challenging world that we find ourselves in, is lean in on those communities, make the most of them, find the one that makes the most sense for you. Yes, you can get a sense of community from LinkedIn if you're posting and other people are commenting, but it can also be a very scary place, because you're putting yourself out there. If you pose a provocative challenge, you might get battered by people's challenges back on your view, or you might pose a really interesting question and nobody comments on it, and you feel like, well, what's the point? Why do I even bother?
I'm shouting into the void here. Yeah,
exactly. For me, I think I can't even say the difference that I felt in the last couple of years, where I've really been leaning into being a part of communities and finding, a tribe of people that are there and available to you to chat to if you need it. Either on WhatsApp groups or on Slack workspace, or some people I've connected with, and actually Graham is an interesting one. We connected over a thread on a LinkedIn post. Like we both agreed or had a similar view. We were chatting on the thread, and then we said, should we just actually meet? And then, one thing led to another, and I ended up joining, the product mind community. So I think there's a lot to be said for reaching out to people, finding like-minded individuals, taking the time to have those conversations and to leaning into communities, because the role of product can be very lonely.
Yeah. And we've seen a couple of major events, haven't we? First of all, the lockdown, which I think was quite humbling and vulnerable making for a lot of people in it. It caused people to reach out for community because the person that they normally talk to down at the corner shop was out of reach, right? And then I'm also just really seeing the last 18 months of downturn in the economy, particularly for those of us that have worked in high growth, high speed startups and scale ups and tech businesses. Suddenly it felt like the music stopped. And that's extremely difficult in terms of what you've described and imposter syndrome. And I totally agree with you on that. And I've been podcasting for 8 years, and I feel it every single time I get in front of the mic. And I just think to myself, this might help someone, and that makes it okay. If I stumble over my words, it's all right. It's a conversation. We're just doing
be real and accessible.
Exactly.
Be perfect and untouchable.
Exactly. And so this last 18 months of people finding themselves suddenly really uprooted and looking, and so many of them, right? So many good people that you and I would not have expected to be uprooted, right? There's been this real outpouring of support for each other, and that I've really enjoyed. So
I've felt that in a really tangible way recently. And I can't even tell you how wonderful it felt just to know that there were genuinely people like en masse willing to spend the time, reach out, connect. I think that's the real benefit of the product community, is knowing, that there's more people out there that you can talk to as well. I think certainly for me, it was quite emotional actually. To be specific, I posted about the fact that I was recently made redundant and I was looking for work, and was just, did a little post saying, it's how we connected, isn't it, Ollie? I think.
It is,
yeah.
Because it reminded me of, this time last year when the same thing happened to me, right?
Yeah. And I made myself a bit vulnerable. I was very honest. And then I did this is what you would get if you worked for me type of pitch, but it was very me. I used my tone of voice in the way that I posted. And I was just absolutely bowled over by the amount of people that either reposted it, commented, or reached out to me one-on-one. And it's actually initiated a number of really interesting conversations, not least this connection. And I think people are genuinely wanting to, if you help somebody, then it's a bit like karma, isn't it? They might help. I did a CV clinic a way back, and we sort of helped a couple of hundred people with their CVs and their profile and how to position themselves and take themselves to market. It wasn't just me. I had probably about 20 product leaders, sort of proficient and experienced product hiring managers looking at people's CVs and helping people who maybe weren't quite positioning themselves in the right way, or really
that's really cool
what they were doing. And we saw some huge success, like people who went from, being ghosted left, right and centre to having 2 or 3 interviews and job offers. Because as soon as you've got someone who's used to reading a product CV, looking at it and telling you with, unabridged feedback, well, this is why you're struggling because you're not doing this, and why are you using this title? Well, that was my title, but no one understands that title. So to write the thing that you did, not the thing that you were told you was the label you were given. Just basic stuff, But yeah, there's definitely some product karma going on at the moment for me. So I really appreciated that. It was wonderful.
So this is normal. We've seen it before. Don't worry, we'll see it again, and it will pass, and we'll still be needed, and you're not alone.
Yeah.
And there's people out there who probably feel the same way, and will be grateful to chat.
Excellent summary.
You're welcome. So folks, thank you for listening. Beks, thank you so much for making the time. There are at least 3 more topics that we will explore over time, I expect. And folks, thank you for listening. Hope you've enjoyed that. Hope you got something from it, particularly if you work adjacent to product rather than in product, because product is a mindset, not necessarily just a role or a job title. Got plenty of interesting episodes coming up, so make sure you subscribe, look after each other, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Beks.
Cheers, Ollie.